The bridge of the Tempest's Edge hummed with quiet activity as Captain Lee Tejo reviewed the latest survey reports from the Outer Rim territories. The exploration vessel had been mapping uncharted systems for 3 months now, far from the safety of human space. Lee rubbed his tired eyes and looked out at the stars streaming past through the main view screen. They were good stars, he thought, full of possibilities and mysteries waiting to be discovered. Lieutenant Park So-min sat at her communication station, monitoring the usual background chatter of space traffic. Most of it was automated beacon, signals and cargo ship schedules, nothing that required immediate attention. She had been doing this job for 2 years now and knew the difference between routine signals and something that mattered. That was why the strange transmission that suddenly filled her headphones made her sit up straight. The signal was weak and broken, coming from somewhere deep in unexplored space. Park So-min quickly ran it through the ship's translation matrix, but the language was completely unknown. What caught her attention was not the words but the mathematical sequences embedded in the transmission. Every species in the galaxy used the same basic mathematical principles to indicate distress, and these numbers were screaming for help. "Captain," she called out, her voice cutting through the bridge's quiet atmosphere. "I'm picking up what looks like a distress signal, but it's in an unknown language." Lee turned from his reports and walked over to her station. The captain was a tall man with graying hair at his temples, a veteran of Earth's colonial expansion who had seen more than his share of difficult situations. He listened to the signal through the speakers, hearing the desperation even without understanding the words. "How far out is it coming from?" Lee asked, studying the readouts on Park So-min's screen. "At least 12 light years, maybe more," she replied. "The signal is very weak and highly fragmented. Whatever is sending this is either very far away or using damaged equipment." Dr. Kim Han-sol looked up from his workstation, where he had been cataloging mineral samples from their last planetary survey. The ship's AI specialist was known for his ability to crack even the most complex alien communication protocols. "Send it to my station," he said. "Let me see what I can make of it." The bridge fell quiet except for the soft beeping of instruments as Dr. Kim worked on the transmission. His fingers danced across holographic displays, running the signal through various linguistic databases and pattern recognition programs. The ship's advanced AI systems hummed to life, analyzing every aspect of the mysterious message. After 20 minutes of intense work, Dr. Kim suddenly straightened in his chair. "I've got something," he announced. "The language is completely new to our databases, but I've been able to decode some of the mathematical references and basic concepts." Captain Lee moved to stand behind the doctor's chair, looking at the translated text appearing on the screen. What he read made his expression grow serious. "They call themselves the Villani," Dr. Kim continued. "They appear to be some kind of trading convoy that's been attacked. The attackers are identified as something called the Kreth Dominion. From what I can translate, the Kreth are described as a militaristic empire that enslaves other species." The translated message was fragmented, but the desperation was clear. The Villani were describing their attackers as overwhelmingly powerful, with advanced weapons and no mercy for those who resisted. Their convoy had been scattered, their escort ships destroyed, and they were running out of time. But what made Captain Lee's blood run cold was a particular section of the message that Dr. Kim highlighted on the screen. The Villani were calling out to the Deathworlders from the Forbidden Sector, a clear reference to humans and Earth. "They know about us," Lee said quietly. "It gets more interesting," Dr. Kim replied. "They describe humans as coming from what they call a world of death and violence, but they're still asking for our help. They say they have nowhere else to turn." Sergeant Major Choi Min-ho, the ship's tactical officer, had been listening to the conversation from his station. The stocky Marine was known for his direct approach to problems and his loyalty to his crewmates. "Captain, this could be a trap," he said. "We don't know anything about these aliens or their enemies. For all we know, this could be bait to draw us into an ambush." Commander Yoon Ji-woo, the ship's chief engineer, spoke up from her position near the main power distribution panel. She was a small woman with calloused hands and an engineer's practical mindset. "The sergeant major has a point," she said. "We're one ship, far from any backup. If this Kreth Dominion is as powerful as the message suggests, we could be flying into a situation we can't handle. Captain Lee stood silently for a moment, weighing the options. The Tempest Edge was an exploration vessel, not a warship. They had defensive capabilities and a small marine detachment, but they were not equipped for major combat operations. Getting involved in an alien conflict could mean the deaths of everyone aboard, but the message continued to play through the speakers and the mathematical distress codes were becoming more urgent. Whoever these Villani were, they were running out of time. Lieutenant Commander Shin Da-un, the ship's intelligence officer, had been quietly analyzing the signal's origin point. She was a sharp-eyed woman who noticed details others missed, a skill that had saved the ship more than once during their exploration mission. "Captain," she said, "I've been tracking the signal's path. If these Villani are who they claim to be, they're civilians. Traders, not military. The signal is coming from the edge of what appears to be a major shipping lane, which means other innocent ships could be at risk," Lee said, understanding the implications immediately. Dr. Bae Sung-jin, the ship's chief medical officer, looked up from his research station where he had been studying alien biology reports. The doctor was known for his compassion and his belief that all life was precious, regardless of species. "Captain, if there are survivors out there, they need medical attention. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that people will die." The bridge fell silent again as everyone waited for the captain's decision. Lee knew that whatever choice he made would define not just their mission, but potentially how humanity was viewed by other species in the galaxy. The Villani had called humans Deathworlders, but they were still asking for help. That said something important about both species. "Navigation Officer Im Woo-sung," Lee called out. The young officer immediately looked up from his charts. "Plot a course to the signal's origin point, best possible speed." "Aye, sir," Im Woo-sung replied, his hands already working on the navigation computers. "Sergeant Major Choi, I want all combat systems checked and ready," Lee continued. "Commander Yoon, make sure our engines are running at peak efficiency. We may need to move fast once we get there." "Captain," Park So-min said from her communication station, "should I send a response to let them know we're coming?" Lee considered this for a moment. "Send a simple mathematical acknowledgement," he said finally. "Let them know someone heard their call, but don't give away our position or capabilities. We don't know who else might be listening." As the crew began preparations for the journey to the distress signal's source, Captain Lee returned to his command chair and stared out at the stars. They were about to enter a situation they didn't fully understand, to help people they had never met, against enemies they knew nothing about. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that seemed to find humans wherever they went in the galaxy. But that was what separated humans from other species, Lee reflected. They didn't abandon people in need, even when the smart thing to do was walk away, even when the odds were against them, even when it might mean their own deaths. The Tempest Edge changed course and jumped to hyperspace, racing toward an unknown fate among the stars. The Tempest's Edge raced through hyperspace at maximum velocity, its hull vibrating slightly from the strain of pushing the engines beyond their normal limits. In the ship's main briefing room, Captain Lee Tae-ho gathered his senior staff around the holographic display table, where Lieutenant Commander Shin Da-yun was presenting what intelligence they had managed to gather about their destination. Ewan. Hologram showed a three-dimensional map of the sector where the distress signal had originated. Red markers indicated the last known positions of the Villani convoy, while orange symbols marked what appeared to be Kreth military vessels. The tactical picture was not encouraging. "Based on our analysis of the signal and additional transmissions we've intercepted," Shin Da-yun reported, "we're looking at a Kreth battle group consisting of at least 12 heavy cruisers and approximately 40 smaller escort vessels. Intelligence suggests this is a standard Kreth raiding formation, designed to capture and enslave entire convoys." Sergeant Major Choi Min-ho studied the display with the experienced eye of a career military officer. He had fought in the border conflicts during humanity's early expansion and knew how to read a tactical situation. What he saw made him shake his head grimly. "That's enough firepower to take on a major fleet engagement," he said. "We're talking about facing odds of at least 50 to 1. Commander Yoon Ji-woo ran her fingers through her short black hair as she examined the technical specifications displayed alongside the tactical overview. The engineering data they had gathered about Kreth vessels showed advanced shielding technology and weapon systems that were, on paper, superior to human designs. "Their ships are bigger than ours and appear to have more advanced defensive systems," she said. "In a straight fight, we'd be outgunned and outmatched." Dr. Kim Han-sol had been working frantically since they entered hyperspace, analyzing every piece of data about the Kreth Dominion that their ship's AI could find in the galactic information networks. "The Kreth have a reputation throughout this sector," he reported. "They've conquered or enslaved at least 15 different species over the past century. Their standard operating procedure is to overwhelm resistance with superior numbers and firepower, then sort the survivors into useful categories for slavery." The briefing room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They were one exploration vessel, going up against a military force that had successfully conquered multiple civilizations. By any reasonable analysis, they were flying toward certain death. But Captain Lee had not become a successful exploration captain by avoiding difficult situations. He leaned forward and studied the tactical display more carefully. "What about the Villani?" he asked. "What do we know about them?" "From what we can determine, they're a peaceful trading species," Dr. Kim replied. "Their ships are lightly armed cargo vessels with minimal defensive capabilities. The Kreth caught them completely off guard, which is why the convoy was scattered so easily." Navigation Officer Im Woo-sung, who had been quietly calculating travel times and hyperspace routes, looked up from his datapad. "Captain, we should be dropping out of hyperspace in approximately 6 hours," he said. "Once we arrive at the coordinates, we'll have a better picture of the tactical situation." It was at that moment that the ship's proximity alarms chimed softly. Dr. Bae Sung-jin's voice came over the intercom from the medical bay. "Captain, we've got incoming escape pods on our port side. Looks like survivors from the Villani convoy. Bring them aboard immediately," Lee ordered. "Full medical assistance for any wounded." 20 minutes later, 3 Villani survivors were being treated in the ship's medical bay. Dr. Bae had done his best to make them comfortable, but it was clear they were in poor condition. The aliens were tall and slender, with large eyes and delicate features that suggested they had evolved on a world with lighter gravity and fewer predators than Earth. The lead Villani, who identified himself as Merchant Captain Thel Moonwhisper, spoke through the ship's universal translator with a voice that trembled from exhaustion and fear. "You came," he said, his large eyes showing amazement. "The Deathworlders actually came to help us." Captain Lee sat beside the alien's medical bed, trying to project calm authority, despite the desperate situation they were all facing. "We received your distress call," he said simply. "Can you tell us what happened?" Thel's account was horrifying in its simplicity. The Villani convoy had been traveling a well-established trade route when the Kreth battle group had appeared out of hyperspace, without warning. The attack had been swift and brutal, with the Kreth disabling rather than destroying the Villani ship so they could capture the crews for slavery. "They took over 300 of my people," Thel said, his voice breaking with emotion. "They're holding them aboard the command ships, waiting to transport them to the slave markets in Kreth space." "How many Kreth ships are we talking about exactly?" Sergeant Major Choi asked, his tactical mind focused on the military aspects of the situation. 12 of their heavy warships, Thel replied, plus many smaller vessels for boarding and capture. Operations. Their War Admiral Vex Grimton leads the battle group. He is known throughout the sector for his cruelty and his collection of exotic slaves. The humans exchanged glances. The odds they faced were even worse than their initial estimates had suggested. Not only were they outnumbered 50 to 1, but they were going up against an experienced military commander with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. But Dr. Bae noticed something interesting about the Villani survivors. Despite their fear and exhaustion, they kept looking at the humans with something approaching awe. "Why do you call us Deathworlders?" he asked gently. Another Villani survivor, a young female named Sela Brightstar, answered in a whisper. Your world, she said. Earth. The galactic databases classify it as a Class 12 death world. The most dangerous classification possible. Dr. Kim leaned forward with interest. Dangerous in what way? Everything, Sela replied, her large eyes wide with amazement. Your gravity is 3 times stronger than most inhabited worlds. Your atmosphere contains poisonous oxygen at levels that would kill most species. Your planet experiences extreme temperature variations, massive storms, seismic activity, and radiation exposure that would sterilize other worlds. But that's not the worst part, Thel added, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Your world is filled with predators, creatures that hunt and kill for survival. The galactic databases say that Earth has produced more apex predator species than any other known planet. Commander Yoon raised an eyebrow. And humans evolved alongside these predators? Not alongside them, Sela said quietly. According to the databases, humans became the ultimate apex predator. You didn't just survive on a death world, you conquered it. The human crew members looked at each other with new understanding. What they considered normal living conditions, Earth's gravity, atmosphere, weather, and wildlife, were apparently viewed by the galaxy as impossibly hostile. They had grown up thinking Earth was just home, but to other species it was literally a world of death. That's why the Kreth spread warnings about humans throughout this sector, Thel continued. They call you barbarians and savages, creatures too dangerous to be allowed to expand into civilized space. Captain Lee stood up slowly, his mind working through the implications of this information. The Kreth had been preparing for human expansion by spreading propaganda about human aggression and violence. But they had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that human barbarism was a weakness rather than a strength. Sergeant Major, Lee said, turning to Choi Min-ho, I want you to brief the crew on what we've just learned. It's time they understood exactly what advantages we have. Sir, Choi replied with a grim smile, should I prepare the Marines for boarding actions? Prepare them for everything, Lee said. Commander Yoon, I need our engines and weapon systems operating at peak efficiency. Dr. Kim, start analyzing. Kreth ship designs for weaknesses. Captain, Dr. Bay said from beside the Villani survivors, these people are expecting us to abandon them. They think we'll realize the odds and retreat to safety. Lee looked down at Thel Moonwhisper, whose large eyes showed both hope and resignation. The alien clearly wanted to believe that the humans would help, but his experience with the galaxy's other species had taught him that no one risked their lives for strangers. Merchant Captain Thel, Lee said formally, I want you to understand something about humans. We don't abandon people who need help regardless of the odds against us. Your people will be rescued. The Villani stared at him in amazement, unable to comprehend a species that would choose certain death over abandoning strangers. But the humans were already moving, preparing for a battle that would test everything they had learned from growing up on humanity's violent, beautiful, impossible world. The Tempest's edge dropped out of hyperspace directly into chaos. The main view screen immediately filled with the massive shapes of Kreth warships arranged in a loose formation around several crippled Villani cargo vessels. The alien warships were dark and angular, bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays that gave them a predatory appearance against the starfield. Captain Lee Tae-ho stood on the bridge and took in the tactical situation with the calm focus that had made him a successful exploration captain. 12 heavy cruisers, each one 3 times the size of his ship, plus dozens of smaller escort vessels. Any reasonable military analysis would conclude that the smart thing to do was retreat immediately and call for reinforcements. But humans had not colonized the galaxy by being reasonable. Lieutenant Ryu J. Sung, Lee called to his weapons officer, target their formation center. Prepare for maximum alpha strike on my command. The young weapons officer's hands moved quickly across his control panels, bringing the ship's defensive weapons online. The Tempest's Edge was an exploration vessel, but it carried enough firepower to defend itself against pirates and hostile wildlife. Against a Kreth battle group, those weapons should have been laughably inadequate. Communications open on all frequencies, Lee continued. Let's introduce ourselves to our new friends. Lieutenant Park So-min activated the ship's transmission systems, and Lee's voice echoed across space to every ship in the Kreth formation. This is Captain Lee Tae-ho of the Terran Colonial Defense Force, he announced in a voice that carried absolute authority. You have attacked civilians under our protection. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. The response from the Kreth came quickly. A harsh, guttural voice filled with arrogance replied through the universal translators. This is War Admiral Vex Grimton of the Kreth Dominion. You are one ship against my entire battle group. Retreat now, and we will allow you to live. Captain. Lee smiled grimly. Negative, War Admiral. You have exactly 60 seconds to release the prisoners and withdraw from this system. The alien's laughter was like grinding metal. Foolish Deathworlder. Your reputation for violence does not frighten civilized warriors. You will make excellent slaves once we break your primitive spirit. 60 seconds, Lee repeated calmly, then cut the transmission. On the tactical display, Sergeant Major Choi Min-ho watched the Kreth ships beginning to maneuver into attack formation. The enemy vessels moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance. Their formation was designed for overwhelming firepower rather than defensive positioning. They're treating us like any other species they've conquered, Choi observed. Standard intimidation tactics followed by crushing force. Flight Lieutenant Oh Soo-young, Lee called to his pilot. The young woman looked up from her control station with bright eyes that showed no fear, despite the impossible odds they faced. Are you ready to show these aliens how humans learn to fly? Yes, sir, she replied with a grin that would have terrified the Kreth if they could have seen it. Where would you like me to take us? Right through the middle of their formation, Lee said casually, as if he were discussing the weather rather than ordering a suicide run against overwhelming odds. The countdown reached 0, and the battle began with typical human unpredictability. Instead of trying to maintain distance and fight a defensive action, the Tempest's edge accelerated directly toward the center of the Kreth formation at maximum velocity. Lieutenant Ryu unleashed the ship's full weapons arsenal in a concentrated barrage that struck the Kreth flagship just as Flight Lieutenant O threw the ship into a diving spiral that took them between two enemy cruisers. The human ship's weapons were not designed to penetrate heavy cruiser armor, but they were aimed with precision that the Kreth had never encountered before. Instead of targeting the enemy ship's heavily armored hulls or main weapons, Ryu focused his fire on life support systems, sensor arrays, and communications equipment. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Kreth warriors who had expected a brief, overwhelming victory suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives as their ship's basic systems failed around them. Their formation is breaking up, Choi reported from the tactical station. 3. Ships have lost primary life support and are falling back. The flagship's communications array is down. But the real terror for the Kreth came when they tried to return fire and discovered that hitting the human ship was nearly impossible. Flight Lieutenant O was performing maneuvers that would have killed most alien crews from the G-forces alone. She threw the Tempest's edge through rolls and spirals that defied every known principle of space combat, weaving between enemy fire with the instinctive grace of a predator that had evolved to hunt in three-dimensional forests. How are they doing that? Came a panicked transmission from one of the Kreth vessels that Park So-min intercepted. No crew can survive those acceleration forces. The answer was simple but incomprehensible to species that had evolved on safer worlds. Humans had grown up on a high-gravity planet where survival meant adapting to forces that would crush other species. What seemed impossible to the Kreth was merely aggressive flying to humans. Commander Yoon Ji-woo watched her engineering displays with satisfaction as the ship's systems performed flawlessly under combat stress. Human engineering philosophy was different from other species, where aliens built for efficiency and safety, humans built for reliability under extreme conditions. Every system on the ship had multiple backups and could function well beyond its rated specifications. When enemy fire finally struck the Tempest's edge and damaged the primary weapons array, Yoon immediately began rerouting power systems. Within minutes, She had converted the ship's mining lasers and sample collection equipment into improvised weapons that were actually more effective than the original armament. "Mining laser online and targeted," she reported calmly. "Shall I demonstrate what human industrial equipment can do to alien armor?" The converted mining laser punched through a Kreth cruiser's shields and hull like they were made of paper. The weapon was designed to cut through asteroid rock and metal ore, which meant that starship armor provided no protection whatsoever. War Admiral Vex Grimton watched in growing horror from his flagship's bridge as his carefully planned ambush turned into a nightmare. 3 of his heavy cruisers were already crippled and falling back, their crews panicking as human weapons systematically destroyed their life support systems. 2 more ships had collided with each other while trying to track the impossible movements of the human vessel. "All ships concentrate fire on the Deathworlder ship," he ordered desperately. "Destroy it now before it cripples our entire fleet." But coordinating fire against the Tempest's edge proved impossible. Flight Lieutenant O was flying patterns that seemed random, but were actually based on human combat instincts honed by millions of years of hunting dangerous prey. She anticipated enemy fire and changed course before the Kreth gunners could adjust their aim. The psychological warfare continued as well. Every time a Kreth ship lost life support or had its hull breached, Lieutenant Park So-min broadcast rescue frequencies on Kreth emergency channels. The message was simple but terrifying to the alien warriors. The humans were not trying to kill them quickly. They were systematically hunting them like prey animals. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Shin Da-eun from her intelligence station, "I'm intercepting communications between the Kreth ships. Their morale is collapsing. Several captains are requesting permission to retreat." Captain Lee nodded grimly. The battle was going exactly as he had hoped. Humans had learned long ago that defeating an enemy's will to fight was often more effective than simply destroying their ships. The Kreth had come expecting to face another peaceful species like the Villani. Instead, they had encountered apex predators who treated warfare as a natural extension of hunting. "Navigation Officer Im Woo-sung," Lee called. "Plot micro-jumps that will put us in 3 different locations in rapid succession. Let's give them the impression that we have reinforcements arriving." The young navigation officer's fingers danced across his controls, calculating hyperspace jumps that would normally be considered recklessly dangerous. But humans had learned to navigate the galaxy by taking risks that other species avoided, and Im Woo-sung had grown up plotting courses through asteroid fields and unstable nebulae. The Tempest's edge vanished from the center of the Kreth formation and reappeared simultaneously at 3 different locations around the battlefield, each appearance accompanied by devastating weapons fire. The effect on Kreth morale was catastrophic, as ship after ship reported that multiple human vessels were attacking from all directions. "This is impossible," came a transmission from one of the Kreth cruisers. "How many ships do the Deathworlders have?" War Admiral Vex Grimton stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. Half his fleet was crippled or retreating, and he still had not managed to land a single decisive hit on the human ship. His warriors, who had conquered 15 different species, were being systematically hunted by a single vessel crewed by creatures from a death world. For the first time in his career, the War Admiral began to understand why the galaxy feared the Deathworlders. The battle had been raging for 2 hours, and the psychological impact on the Kreth fleet was becoming more devastating than the physical damage. Communications specialist Lim Hyo-jin sat at her station, intercepting and translating the increasingly panicked transmissions between enemy vessels. What she heard confirmed everything the humans had suspected about their opponents. "War Admiral, this is Captain Zek Ironmaw of the cruiser Bloodfang," came one transmission. "My crew is requesting permission to withdraw. They are saying the Deathworlders fight like demons, that they enjoy the killing," another voice cut in from a different ship. "This is not warfare as we know it. They target our life support first. They hunt us like prey animals. My warriors are afraid to leave their battle stations." Captain Lee Tae-ho listened to these intercepted messages with grim satisfaction. The Kreth had built their empire by conquering species that fought according to predictable patterns, defensive formations, logical targeting priorities, and reasonable risk assessment. They had never encountered an enemy that treated combat as a natural extension of hunting behavior. Lieutenant Commander Shin Da-un, Lee called to his intelligence officer. Analysis of enemy morale? The sharp-eyed woman studied her displays carefully before responding. 6 of their 12 heavy cruisers are combat ineffective, sir. 3 have lost primary life support, 2 have suffered catastrophic engine damage, and 1 appears to be adrift with total power failure. Of the remaining, 6-4 are showing signs of crew panic based on their erratic maneuvering patterns. Sergeant Major Choi Min-ho looked up from his tactical station with the predatory smile of a career warrior who had found worthy prey. Captain, I recommend we demonstrate another aspect of human warfare that they're not expecting. What did you have in mind, Sergeant Major? A boarding action, Choi replied simply. Their ships are designed to prevent breakouts by prisoners, not to repel boarders. I doubt they've ever faced an enemy that would voluntarily enter their vessels to fight in close quarters. Captain Lee considered this proposal. The Kreth were known to be physically larger and stronger than humans, with natural armor plating and clawed appendages that made them formidable in personal combat. Any reasonable species would avoid close quarters fighting with such opponents, but humans were not reasonable, and they had advantages that the Kreth could not anticipate. Master Sergeant Kang Hye-jin, Lee called over the intercom to the Marine. Commander, prepare a boarding party. We're going to pay a visit to one of those cruisers. The response came back immediately, filled with barely controlled excitement. Aye, sir. How many Marines do you want for the party? Just you and 2 others, Lee replied. Corporal John Mu-sung and Private First Class Song Ha-rin should be sufficient. The silence on the bridge was telling. 3 humans were going to board a Kreth heavy cruiser that contained at least 300 alien warriors. By any logical analysis, it was suicide. Flight Lieutenant Oh Soo-young brought the Tempest's Edge alongside the Kreth cruiser designated as their target. The enemy vessel was one of the ships that had lost primary life support, and its crew was focused on emergency repairs rather than defense against boarders. The ship's hull was scarred and blackened from human weapons fire, and several sections were venting atmosphere into space. The boarding party prepared in the ship's airlocks, wearing combat suits that had been designed for exploring hostile planets rather than ship-to-ship warfare. The equipment reflected human adaptability, tools that could function as weapons, environmental suits that could survive in any atmosphere, and medical supplies that could treat injuries from exotic alien environments. Master Sergeant Kang Hye-jin was a small woman whose appearance was completely at odds with her reputation as one of the most dangerous close combat specialists in the Colonial Defense Force. She had grown up in the slums of Old Seoul, where survival meant learning to fight opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed. The Kreth warriors were certainly bigger and stronger, but they had never faced a human who had learned to hunt in urban warfare. Remember, she told her 2 companions as they sealed their helmets, we're not trying to kill all of them. We want prisoners who can spread the word about what happens when you fight humans in close quarters. The boarding party crossed the gap between ships using maneuvering jets, moving with the fluid grace of predators approaching their prey. The Kreth vessel's hull was pitted with weapon strikes, and finding an entry point was simple for humans, who had learned to navigate damaged structures on a world where earthquakes and storms regularly destroyed buildings. They cut through the hull using industrial plasma torches, creating an entrance that bypassed all of the ship's security systems. The Kreth had not designed their vessels to repel boarders who could literally cut their way in from the outside. The interior of the alien ship was a nightmare of twisted metal and flickering lights. Emergency klaxons blared constantly, and the air was thick with smoke from damaged systems. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal, which gave the humans a significant advantage in mobility. The first group of Kreth warriors they encountered was a damage control team trying to repair a power conduit. The aliens were massive creatures, easily 8 feet tall with thick gray hide and prominent bony ridges that served as natural armor. Their clawed hands could tear through metal, and their powerful jaws contained rows of sharp teeth designed for ripping flesh. They should have been more than a match for 3 small humans in a confined space. The fight was over in less than 30 seconds. Master Sergeant Kang moved with the fluid efficiency of a born predator, using the ship's tight corridors and low gravity to her advantage. Where the Kreth expected direct confrontation, she provided misdirection and ambush tactics. Where they used brute strength, she used precision and speed. Corporal Jian and Private Song flanked the aliens with coordinated movements that spoke of countless hours of training together. They did not fight like individual warriors, but as a pack, each movement designed to support the others and create opportunities for decisive strikes. The Kreth warriors fell without landing a single blow on their human attackers. "Secure the prisoners," Kang ordered calmly, as if she had just finished a routine training exercise rather than defeating 8 alien warriors in close combat. Word of the boarding action spread through the Kreth fleet with the speed of panic. The alien warriors had built their reputation on being unbeatable in close-quarters combat, using their size and natural weapons to dominate any opponent foolish enough to face them directly. The idea that 3 small humans could board one of their ships and defeat trained warriors in their own corridors was beyond their understanding. Dr. Kim Han-sol, monitoring communications from his station on the Tempest's edge, reported the psychological impact of the boarding action. "The Kreth are calling it impossible," he said. "Their warriors are describing humans as death spirits who cannot be killed in normal combat." Commander Yoon Ji-woo had been analyzing the technical aspects of the Kreth vessels during the battle, looking for weaknesses that human engineering could exploit. "Their ships are overbuilt," she reported. "Heavy armor and redundant systems, but they're not designed for the kind of precision damage we've been inflicting. They expect to absorb massive amounts of firepower and keep fighting, but they can't handle surgical strikes against critical systems." The boarding party moved through the alien vessel like ghosts, systematically disabling key systems and capturing crew members who were too shocked to offer effective resistance. The Kreth had never encountered an enemy that could move through their own ship with such confidence and efficiency. "Bridge secured," came Master Sergeant Kang's voice over the radio. "We've got their captain and senior officers. They're requesting terms for surrender." Captain Lee smiled grimly. "Tell them that surrender is not an option for the command staff. They will order their remaining ships to withdraw from this system immediately, and they will release all Volani prisoners. Any ship that refuses these terms will be boarded and taken by force." War Admiral Vex Grimton listened to these demands with growing desperation. Half his fleet was crippled, his warriors were demoralized, and humans had demonstrated that they could board and capture his ships at will. The Deathworlders were not fighting according to any known military doctrine. They were hunting his fleet like prey animals. "All ships," he transmitted on the fleet command frequency, "prepare to withdraw from this system. Release the prisoners as ordered." But even as he gave the order, Vex Grimton was planning one final desperate gambit. The humans had humiliated him in front of his warriors, and his reputation as a conqueror was in ruins. If he could not defeat them in battle, perhaps he could destroy their spirit by targeting what they seemed to value most: the lives of innocent civilians. The War Admiral turned to his weapons officer and issued an order that would prove to be his final and most fatal mistake. "Target the Volani prisoner ships," he commanded. "If we cannot have them as slaves, then we will show these Deathworlders what happens to those they try to protect." The moment War Admiral Vex Grimton's flagship opened fire on the defenseless Volani prisoner ships, he discovered the difference between human aggression and human fury. Captain Lee Tae-ho's response was immediate, decisive, and absolutely final. "All weapons target the flagship," Lee commanded, his voice carrying a cold rage that made every human on the bridge understand that diplomacy was over. "Maximum firepower, no mercy." The Tempest's edge turned toward the Kreth flagship with the focused intensity of an apex predator that had just seen its territory violated. Flight Lieutenant Oh Soo-young pushed the engines beyond their safety limits, closing the distance in seconds, while Lieutenant Ryu Jae-sung coordinated a weapons barrage that demonstrated the full destructive potential of human engineering. Mining lasers, converted sensor arrays, and improvised explosive devices struck the flagship in a concentrated pattern that turned its heavy armor into molten slag. But this was not the surgical precision the humans had shown earlier. This was the raw destructive power of a species that had learned warfare on a world where extinction was always one mistake away. The flagship's shields collapsed under the assault. Its hull split open like a broken egg, and its life support systems failed in cascading explosions that lit up the darkness of space. War Admiral Vex Grimton died believing he had finally provoked the Deathworlders into the savage barbarism he had expected all along. He never understood that what he saw as barbarism was simply human justice delivered with mathematical precision. "Flagship destroyed," reported Sergeant Major Choi Min-ho from his tactical station. His voice carried the satisfaction of a professional soldier who had just eliminated a threat to innocent lives. "Remaining Kreth vessels are requesting immediate surrender." Captain Lee stood silently for a moment, looking out at the debris field that had once been the enemy flagship. Around them, the surviving Kreth ships had powered down their weapons and were broadcasting surrender codes on all frequencies. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. "Tactical Officer Park Jun-seok," Lee called to one of his junior officers. "Coordinate the surrender of all remaining Kreth vessels. Any ship that shows signs of hostile intent is to be disabled immediately." The young officer nodded and began the complex process of accepting the surrender of an alien fleet. It was not something that human military doctrine had prepared them for, but humans had always been adaptable when faced with new situations. Dr. Bae Sung-jin was already preparing medical supplies for the rescued Villani prisoners when the first transport shuttles began arriving from the liberated ships. The alien civilians were in poor condition after their ordeal, but they were alive and free. The doctor worked with the calm efficiency that had made him one of the most respected medical officers in the Colonial Defense Force. "Captain," came a transmission from Master Sergeant Kang Hai-jin, still aboard the captured Kreth cruiser. "The prisoners we've taken are requesting to speak with you. They say they have information about other Kreth operations in this sector." Lee nodded. Human military doctrine emphasized the importance of intelligence gathering, especially when dealing with unknown enemies. "Bring their senior officers to the Tempest's Edge. We'll conduct proper interrogations once the immediate situation is stabilized." But the most significant development came when diplomatic attaché Kwan Nari, who had originally been assigned to negotiate mining rights in uncharted systems, found herself conducting first contact with multiple alien species. The Villani convoy had contained not just Villani civilians, but refugees from several other species that had been displaced by Kreth expansion. "Captain," Kwan Nari reported from the ship's makeshift diplomatic suite, "I've been speaking with representatives from at least 6 different species. They're all eager to establish formal relations with humanity. Word of this battle is already spreading through their communication networks." The implications were staggering. In the span of a few hours, humanity had gone from being unknown outsiders to being viewed as the galaxy's potential protectors. The various alien species saw humans not as conquerors, but as liberators who were willing to fight impossible odds to protect innocent lives. Merchant Captain Thel Moonwhisper, still recovering in the medical bay but insisting on participating in the discussions, provided crucial context for what had just occurred. "The Kreth Dominion controlled this entire sector through fear and overwhelming force," he explained to Captain Lee. "No species has ever successfully resisted them. Your victory here will change the balance of power throughout the galaxy." Dr. Kim Hansol had been analyzing the technical data recovered from captured Kreth vessels, and his findings supported Thel's assessment. "The Kreth military doctrine is based on the assumption that they will always have numerical and technological superiority," he reported. "They've never developed tactics for fighting an enemy that could match their aggression and exceed their adaptability." The cultural differences became even more apparent during the interrogation of captured Kreth officers. Commander Yoon Ji-woo observed the proceedings and noted how the alien warriors reacted to human questioning techniques. "They keep expecting us to torture them or execute prisoners," she reported. "The concept that we would follow rules of war even with enemies is completely foreign to them." This presented both opportunities and challenges for humanity's expanding role in galactic affairs. The various alien species viewed human military capabilities with a mixture of admiration and terror, seeing them as incredibly dangerous, but also surprisingly ethical. It was a reputation that could open doors throughout the galaxy if managed properly. Lieutenant Commander Shin Da-un had been analyzing intelligence gathered from multiple sources during the battle, and her assessment painted a picture of a galaxy in transition. The Kreeth Dominion appears to be one of several aggressive expansionist powers in this region, she reported. If we've demonstrated that they can be defeated, other oppressed species may start requesting our assistance. The implications for human expansion were enormous. Instead of having to fight their way into the galaxy against hostile powers, they could position themselves as protectors and peacekeepers. It was a role that suited human psychology perfectly. They had always been most effective when fighting for others, rather than for conquest. Communications Officer Lim Hyo-jin, Captain Lee called. "What's the status of our communications with human space?" The young officer looked up from her station with excitement. "Sir, I've been receiving dozens of new transmissions since the Iawir battle ended. Word is spreading through alien communication networks faster than our own reports can reach home. Species throughout this sector are sending messages asking for human assistance with various conflicts." Captain Lee walked to the main view screen and looked out at the liberated convoy ships and the surrendered Kreeth vessels. In the span of a few hours, they had gone from being explorers to being the galaxy's newest military power. It was not a responsibility he had sought, but it was one that humans seemed uniquely qualified to handle. "Dr. Bay," he called to the medical officer, "what's the status of the rescued prisoners?" "All Vellani survivors are stable and recovering well," Bay replied. "The other species are in various conditions, but none are in immediate danger. What's interesting is their psychological state. They keep asking if humans are going to claim them as property or demand tribute for the rescue." "And what are you telling them?" "The truth," Dr. Bay said simply. "That humans don't enslave people and we don't charge fees for rescue operations. They find this almost impossible to believe." Captain Lee made a decision that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. "Lieutenant Park So-min, open a channel to all vessels in the area, liberated prisoners, surrendered enemies, and anyone else listening." When the channel was open, Lee spoke with the authority of someone who had just proven that humans were willing to fight impossible odds for the right reasons. "This is Captain Lee Tae-ho of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. To all species who have been liberated today, you are free to go wherever you choose. Humanity claims no authority over you and demands no payment for your rescue." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Transmissions poured in from dozens of sources, expressing amazement, gratitude, and requests for further assistance. The galaxy had never encountered a species with the military capability to defeat established powers, but the ethical framework to refuse the spoils of victory. "To the surrendered Kreeth forces," Lee continued, "you will be treated according to human military law. Prisoners will be cared for and eventually returned to your space with a clear message. Any future attacks on civilian populations will be met with overwhelming force." But the most important part of his message was directed toward the broader galaxy. "To any species listening to this transmission, humanity is willing to assist with liberation efforts against oppressive regimes. We ask nothing in return except the opportunity to establish peaceful relations and mutual cooperation." The Tempest's Edge began preparations to escort the liberated convoy to safety, but Captain Lee knew they would not be returning to human space immediately. The communications board was filled with new distress calls and requests for assistance from throughout the sector.